Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you've had a great week this week. I'm glad you tuned in for our youth Sunday school lesson. Before we get started, I want to let you know just a couple things. Friday, a group of us went down and distributed migrant camp health kits and some gifts and a digital VBS for the children to kind of stay in touch with the people that we've worked with for so many years as a church. And so if you were part of that, I just want to say thank you. If you weren't, and next year you'll be eligible to go to migrant camp because you finished ninth grade, I hope you'll plan on calendaring that because that is always an awesome week. And I'm so thankful that Melody helped us get this together so we could at least have some kind of ministry and impact in that area. We are looking to try to do something similar here with some of our local community. And so I'll get you more details about that. Second thing is tomorrow, Monday, I am planning on going to do a local project, going to be doing some underpinning on a trailer and building a deck and a set of stairs. And I'm looking for some help. If you think you could help me tomorrow in the morning, maybe around lunchtime, even anytime tomorrow, if you think you could help, come be a part and put some hands on some work projects here in town, shoot me a text. It's 261-3906 or an email, ashelton@fbccol.net. However you can get in touch with me, give me a call if you got questions. But I'm looking for some volunteers that can help out tomorrow. And it's just a local project we've got going on here that you have a chance to serve. It's our summer serve projects. We're trying to get these going. So I want you to be a part of it if you can. This morning, we're actually going to be looking in the Gospel of Mark. And I love Mark's account of the Gospels because it's almost like Jesus's highlight reel. It's not really long. Everything's kind of fast-paced, and you see all these miraculous healings and all these things that Jesus did and said. And so I found it a really interesting gospel to read. The story this morning is one you may be familiar with because it's a story of two healings, really. It's a lady who had been sick for many years and also a man whose daughter is sick who ends up dying. And just to see how Jesus handles this situation and how he interacts with these people shows us a lot about ourselves, actually, in the situation that we're in because of our sin. So let's get into it. Let's read together out of Mark chapter 5. We're going to be looking at verses 21 through 43. Here's what it says. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. Now remember, that's a synagogue leader. So that's a Jewish guy who's part of the religious system of the day. Okay, so for him to come to Jesus was a pretty big deal. Here's what it goes on and says in verse 23. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. Now, I think that's really cool because Jesus's notoriety was really starting to spread, and even some of these people in the Jewish religious system who were dead set against him, some of them start to see the proof of who he was and start to say, hey, you know what, maybe there's something to it. And this guy, he had faith. He was convinced that Jesus was the answer to what he needed. So let's keep reading. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But think about that. There's a huge crowd that's following Jesus. He's gotten in a boat to cross over the lake. There's another crowd still waiting on him. And he is so pressed in with people for him to say, "Who touched me?" The disciples are like, "Are you serious? Everybody's touching you." But Jesus knew that there had been power going out of his body. The power of God was working in somebody's life. And he turns around and says, "Who did it?" Let's keep reading. But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. Now, just to stop right there, if somebody looked at me and I was mourning the death of someone that I care very deeply about and said, "Oh, they're not dead, they're just sleeping," my instinct would not be laughter. It would be anger because of the pain that I was going through, and for someone to say, "Hey, she's just asleep." The thing about it was that they had this tradition in their day. They had professional mourners. They had people who would come in when somebody died to just come in and cry and make a big deal, and it was like a status thing almost of, when someone that you love dies, there's all these people just carrying on and going crazy. These people didn't maybe have a serious love for this girl because they were just professional mourners who had come in to make a big deal. But they laugh, and I think that kind of shows you right there that they were professional mourners and not family, because who would look at somebody and laugh if you were truly just broken up and torn apart over the death of somebody that you love? Let's keep reading. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. I love that last part because Jesus is like, she's hungry. She's alive now. We don't have to be sad because she's here with us. Let's get her some food. I like the way Jesus always took care of the needs of people, not just physical, but also spiritual. And let's talk a little bit more about that as we go through this lesson. I don't know if you've ever heard of St. Jude Hospital, but that is the hospital where parents who have kind of come to the end of the rope and they have a sick child and they're trying to get this child better, and they've tried everything they can think of, they end up at St. Jude's because it's known around the world as a place that can do things that other hospitals can't. The cutting edge of technology and healing kids and things that they deal with, serious diseases. So when you get to the point where you're at the end of the line and you have nowhere else to turn, you turn there. The thing is, and you can see in the story of this father who had a sick daughter, he was at the end of the line. Here he is, a synagogue leader. This Jesus guy is kind of a polarizing guy for sure. And he's decided, I'm at the end of my line. My last hope is to go to this man that I've heard these stories about, all these miracles that he has performed. I'm going to go and meet this guy. And so he does. And so in a way, this father is like taking his kid to St. Jude. He's going to the only option he can think of. So this father comes to Jesus, and Jesus agrees to go with him. But on the way, as the crowds are pressing in, something else happens. And Jesus took time to stop and find out who it was that had touched him. The Bible gives this description of this woman who had been suffering from bleeding for many, many years, and that she had spent everything that she had trying to find a cure. Now, they didn't have modern medicine like we have. So when you think about this woman spending all of her money, I want to read a description of what some of the prescribed medications were for the specific thing she was dealing with. Let me read this to you. She was to take the gum of Alexandria, the weight of a small silver coin. She was to take alum of the same and crocus of the same, stuff I don't even know what they are. Let them be bruised together and put into wine, and then she was supposed to drink it. If that doesn't work, she was supposed to take Persian onions, boil them in wine, and then drink that. And then say, "Arise from thy flux." And then if that didn't make her better, she was supposed to go where two roads came together and met. She was supposed to hold a cup of wine in her right hand and let somebody come up from behind her and frighten her and say, "Arise from thy flux." I mean, it's like when somebody gets the hiccups, you're supposed to scare them. That's not really medical technology, but this is the kind of stuff she had spent everything that she had on to try to get better. And she was now broke and worse off than she was when it started. So she, just like this father with the sick girl, she's at the end of her rope. And she's heard the fame rising of this Jesus who had performed all these healings. And she thinks to herself, if I can just get close enough to him to touch him, I could be healed. This could be gone. And so she has that kind of a faith that this is real. And she chases after Jesus. And the thing is, this wasn't just a physical healing, okay? Just like we talked about lepers last week, when you had an issue with bleeding like this, you were considered ceremonially unclean. Now, let me explain that to you. By Jewish law, if you were ceremonially unclean, you couldn't go into the temple to worship. which is where they felt like you had to go to be able to worship God. And if somebody who was unclean touched you, it made you unclean. So just like a leper, nobody would want to be around this woman. She was socially ostracized because of this physical condition that she was going through. You could think a lot of like somebody in our times with AIDS. People are so scared to be around them. And a lot of that is not even scientific, because we know how AIDS can be transmitted. And there would be no danger in you being in a room with a person with AIDS, or shaking a hand or giving a hug to a person with AIDS. But there's this stigma and people shy away. Well, for them, this wasn't just the stigma of the sickness. This was the stigma of the spiritually unclean aspect that would come in if you spent time with this woman. So she was socially an outcast. Now, by going to Jesus and touching him, according to the Jewish traditions, she would have made Jesus unclean spiritually, ceremonially, I mean. And so this was like a big risk, but Jesus knew better. Not only did she not make him unclean, he cleansed her. He gave her healing from her sickness. And I believe that she came to know who Jesus was as her Savior. And so that's a spiritual healing. That's an eternal healing. Something even more than the physical things that we face. You know, we can be healed when we get sick. But the truth about it is, all of us one day are going to die. We don't know when that time is. And man, it'd kind of stink if we did. If you were living towards this one day, you know, my life ends that day. That'd be kind of terrible. But we don't know when it's going to happen. But we know even when we are healed from things that we suffer from, eventually one day we're going to die. The thing is, and what Jesus does is he offers us a eternal cleansing, an eternal cure for our sins, so that when we do die, we do leave this earth, there's something even better waiting on us on the other side, that we're going to spend eternity with him in heaven. And that's the hope that we have. Because if your hope is to defeat death, you're hopeless. But if your hope is to defeat a spiritual death and a separation from God, and you place that hope in Jesus Christ, you're going to end up being in heaven with him for all of eternity. And so death doesn't have the final say. Jesus defeated death on the cross. Now, let's look at the pause in this story. Was this woman. Jesus heals her and she's able to go on her way. Remember, this guy had come to Jesus saying that his daughter was sick and he's on the way. Well, as he's dealing with this woman, some of this man's attendants come to him and say, listen, don't bother this teacher anymore. Your daughter's dead. There's no point in him coming now. And Jesus is like, we're going. And so he takes his closest disciples. He takes the family of this girl. He goes in, he heals her. He brings her back from the dead. Now, Jesus also raised Lazarus from the dead, but those kind of miracles were fairly rare. And this is before Jesus had been resurrected from the dead. So as far as somebody coming back from the dead, y'all, this was crazy to them. It's still crazy for us to think about, but we can look back and know that Jesus defeated death, so it can make some kind of sense. But for this guy's daughter to be dead and him to bring her back, that's awesome. And just think about how he would have felt. He could have been hopeless and said, there's nothing you can do. But instead, he goes with Jesus to the house, and Jesus wakes her up. And then one of my favorite parts of the story is after he wakes her up, he's like, get her some food. She's got to be hungry. Jesus was worried about her blood sugar. It's great to know that our Savior saves us spiritually. He tries to take care of us physically and help us walk through the struggles that we have with physical health and issues like that. It's the good news of the message of the gospel, that we have a hope even after this life. And that's kind of the point of the story of today, is that one day we'll all understand that resurrecting power that Jesus showed this girl, but on a whole nother level, because we will be raised to a new life, a life after this life. You know, as a teenager, that's really something you don't think about a whole lot because you're young and you feel like you've got your whole life ahead of you. And you do, and I'm excited for you. But just don't let today keep you from thinking about tomorrow and the future. Have in mind that if you want to understand what it is to have a fulfilled life, a life in Christ, that it's getting up each morning and committing your life to him and saying, God, lead me in the way you want me to go today. But on the way, it's not like you're just miserable. God gives us joy, and God gives us things every day of our life to be thankful for. And the best life truly is the life that's surrendered to him. And I want to encourage you to do that. If you haven't really committed your life to Christ, I pray that you will think seriously about committing to him and saying, you know what, I want to live for you. Because in living for Christ, you'll have the best life that you could ever have. It may not be a life that you thought you were going to have, but it'll be the best life that you could have. and you'll understand joy and peace. And even when you have these struggles, you'll know that the Father is walking right there with you in the middle of everything that you face. So thanks for tuning in this morning. I just want to remind you again, if you're available on Monday to go and work with me, shoot me a text, let me know. I'll get you some details. Look forward to having some more opportunities like that over the course of the summer. And I'm looking at what we could possibly do as we get ready to go back to school. Maybe some kind of a back-to-school retreat if we get the green light to be together. I will definitely let you know what we can get worked out as soon as possible. Y'all have an awesome week, and don't forget to check in Wednesday night for our Wednesday night Bible study. Take care.